All right, all set? All right, welcome to the discussion session of Tuesday, August 22nd. Manager McGill, could you review the agenda items for the meeting tonight?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Tonight's agenda, we have the consideration of a revised sidewalk expansion policy. Commission reviewed these changes during discussion sessions on June 13th and August 8th. We have a request for approval of a subdivision and land development plan for Black Oak Hill for a project on Gilkison and Old Gilkison Road. The 2.7 acre parcel would be divided into 12 parcels and 10 single family homes would be constructed. Don't believe they're actually going to seek approval tonight. They'll just review the plan and we'll vote on that at the next meeting. And then finally, we have the consideration to award a change order for the existing street reconstruction contract. Commission previously approved the expenditure of $64,700 to replace deteriorated sections of sidewalk at the library. The work will be performed by Neando Construction as a change order to that existing contract.
Okay, short agenda. All right, next, solid waste recycling contract. Ian McBean's into the crew. Come on down.
Thank you, commissioners. So at your last meeting, the commission awarded the solid waste and recycling contract to Westmoreland Sanitary Landfill and requested that staff come back in a future discussion session to talk about how we pay for the contract. So there was another memo from me in your packets. You're probably getting tired of hearing from me on this, but there was another one along with this same spreadsheet that I'm showing you now, basically detailing a couple of different options that staff has come up with on how we potentially could pay for the contract. So I'll run through those at a high level. We're not anticipating any decision points from the commission tonight. This is mostly informational and for the commission to have in the back of their heads as we start to get into budget season, because there are budgetary impacts here. And not just with solid waste contract, but there are several other probably big ticket items that will be coming your way in the budget with other cost increases as well. So, this is just one piece of the puzzle, but we wanted to follow up on the commission's request to have this discussion. So, as we know, this was the least expensive bid that was received, even though it is a significant cost increase. We're seeing a 33% increase in the first year with 9% cost increases after that. So currently, the solid waste contract is paid for through the general fund out of real estate taxes, which equates to about 0.82 mils. And if we were to continue to cover the full cost of the solid waste contract through real estate taxes, that's basically these numbers in green down here, which would equate to average annual millage increases that add up to about 0.75 mils over 5 years over the life of the contract. So you can see that the first year would be about a 0.28 mil increase, and then 0.1 or so each year following that. So those would be the annual millage increases just to cover the increased costs in the garbage contract. The other option that's available to the commission is to pay for the solid waste contract by a fee. We talked about this briefly at the very first conversation we had, that there are a few options that staff has come up with to consider a fee-based structure. And I think in the very first, we'll call it essay that I sent you, there was one of the attachments detailed some other communities that have garbage fees and what they're charging, although a lot of them I've seen articles about fees going up all over the place. So we broke it down into two options here, that if the full cost of the contract was immediately converted to a fee starting in 2024, the 2024 per household fee would be $290, and then about 9% escalations from there each year. So those are the total annual fee numbers in the middle. And as we talked about, there's some other options we have there as far as how often do we bill for a fee or other things. The one thing I'll note with a fee that it does do, since we are paying for garbage on a per household basis, that we're paying garbage and recycling, it's all the same. We're paying a flat fee right now on a per household basis. So our contract's based on a per household per month. So the bill a household would receive under a fee-based structure would equate to the actual amount that the municipality is paying for their household for solid waste and recycling. Right now, with it coming out of millage, with a 0.82 mils going towards it, someone living in $1 million home is theoretically paying more towards the trash contract than someone in a $100,000 home. Because their millage rate, 0.82 mils on $1 million assessed value brings in a lot more than 0.82 mils on $100,000 assessed value.
Not theoretical.
Well, actual, yes, but yes, so yes, so that is one thing that I'll note with the advantage of the fee is that the fee would not be charged to every property in the municipality, it would be charged to the 11,065 households that receive solid waste collection through our contract. So it would be a 1-to-1, your household receives solid waste, this is the cost we have for your household, this is what your fee is, pretty much. With a slight administrative fee because we'd be able to bill it in-house through some improvements that the commission funded last year in the budget to the finance department. We have that capacity to do it in-house. The final option that the staff came up with for the commission to consider is a phased approach to a fee. So rather than just putting in a $290 fee right off the bat, we could say, okay, well, we're taking, basically $2.3 million right now is what we're paying for our current garbage contract this year. We'd say, okay, we're gonna take that 2.3 million essentially, keep covering that out of real estate taxes and just charge a fee on the increased cost, that 33% increase in 2024. And then after that, you could phase it in however you want. The structure here shows 20%. So this would basically take 20% of that base amount, that 2.3 million, and convert it to a fee each year while also covering the increase. So then by 2029, when this contract ends, the fee would be covering the full amount for the solid waste contract, but we wouldn't be dropping an entire fee on households all at once. But if the commission wanted to see other numbers, as Andrew does with his spreadsheets very well, these numbers are dynamic, so we could change this, that if you wanted to convert 25%, you can see how, these fee numbers change down at the bottom. So the total annual fee down here changes if we play around with these numbers, or if, say, hypothetically, the commission wanted to keep spending that 0.82 mils of real estate taxes and just use a fee to cover the increases in the contract, that's potentially what it would look like. Start at that $74 fee and work up to about $192 by 2028. So we're happy to answer any questions that the commission might have on this. But those were the primary items we identified, or primary methods we identified as ways to potentially cover the cost increases. The other one I'll mention, because it was in the memo, was that the commission could, it is within their power to allocate funds from the unassigned fund balance to cover cost increases, but that's not a long-term sustainable option. But the commission has that authority to go back to something Manager McGill said at the very first time we presented this, that he has to present a budget to the commission on November 1st. So he would like some, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you said you would like some direction from the group on how to present this in a budget as well. So any direction towards how this is presented in a budget is certainly helpful. But we can also come up with ways. Manager McGill is not allowed to present using unassigned funds to balance his budget. So, we'll have to present something in the budget, but it's open for commission discussion, and really the final decision doesn't need to happen until the budget discussions in November, December time.
I would just add, I read the memo. I think reducing service levels, including staff levels, should not be off the table just because staff doesn't recommend it. I think that was the one line that we have. So when we review the budget, I would just say to the commissioners that we should look at things like that. We don't have to continually just increase taxes to add. There are other options. I'm not saying they're good ones or they're even the best options. Correct.
Reduce resident services.
Correct, yeah. Programs, whatever. So as we go through and start to look at budget items and numbers and things like that, I think we have to look at that as well. We don't have any of those options in front of us, but we don't know what those costs are going to be yet because we obviously don't have the budget numbers yet.
We put that back. You liked my colors.
Yes, I like spreadsheets. That's where I spend my days. I'm just curious what it would look like to do $500,000 on 2024.
So half a mil. for-
Instead of the 0.82.
Because it's an even number.
Well, yeah, drop that 0.82 to a 0.5 in 2024.
So put an additional dollar value of $500,000. Talking what, 1.2 million? Yes. Go negative.
Oh, that's fine. I feel like
You could just goal seek it by.
There we go. So it'd be $187.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Reduced.
Give or take $190.
And how is our staff thinking in terms of billing? You know, if we switch to a fee, just to give me a sense of, or give the public a sense of what the billing process might look like that they would anticipate.
My anticipation is due to year 5 being closer to $480, being a quarterly bill. That, due on the first of every quarter. Would be the sense that you would have, you'd be able to pay online. You'd be able to pay at the same time you pay your stormwater, all those type of things.
Just curious, why not a monthly bill? Pay water monthly.
Stay tuned for that one. Yeah, I think if you decide to go to a fee, I'm most likely going to recommend that we bring sewage billing.
This won't be that much more to add to. it.
I think, I've heard enough from the commission, not trying to read your mind, especially Commissioner Flynn, I'll point him out specifically, I don't mean to call you out there, but having a place to pay it all in one spot, right?
Yes,
So if
right.
you're current on your
Love
bill,
that.
you're not going to 2 different spots, you're going to one spot, you
Get
pay
it
it
all
right
done.
then.
That's
you
right.
pay it,
Just
I
one
think
place
I'm
to
hearing
go.
that, it's gonna add some additional staff, but it's coming from the sewer fund, it won't be a huge, burden to the tax dollar in any way, shape or form, but all delinquencies still go to Jordan. I don't think we go down the route of delinquencies.
Right.
But I think all current billing needs to stay here.
Okay. I like that,
I know,
We have great
you were the
customer
other one I was
service.
gonna pick on, but.
You can pick
Commissioner
on me.
Flynn-
We have the best
Yeah.
customer service.
Yeah.
Really.
So, I think we can do it better, so.
Okay, so 0.82 is what we're currently paying in terms of millage, right?
Correct.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
0.2, that's what it currently costs, but it's invisible to the resident. We're not separate.
Is it possible for you to send this spreadsheet along to us as we get more budget time, so because that's like Commissioner Flynn experimenting with different numbers, so,
He wants it,
Yeah, it's-
it's dynamic, so he can.
Okay with it?
I can say.
Yes.
So millage or fee or a combo, that's what you're asking, or, you're informing us right now, we like one more than the other.
I think there's pros and
Pros
cons.
and cons.
We should, I don't know how much time we have in this session, but, we should talk about the pros and cons, right? So the most efficient way to do it is a millage increase. There's no doubt about it. You just make it into the taxes, we go out, it's the most efficient. We have a 98% collection rate, based on our stormwater fee, it's 96%. On a smaller fee like that, a little bit more, people pay attention maybe more to the real estate tax. And it's escrowed in your mortgage, so all those mortgage companies are paying it, if you bake it in, it's there. So it's a much more efficient way to collect, the extra $763,000 that we need next year to cover the cost of the contract. Other disadvantages to the fee, there's no way for a resident to control the fee. They can't reduce their fee, right? So what we're doing is just it's a pass along. Shifting from one to another. It's not as much of a tax, with the 1040 deduction that you used to have.
Oh,
It's
you're
not
right.
as big of a thing
That's true.
after the Trump tax cuts. It's not as big, but it's still there. But it's just a cost shift, and there's no way for a resident right now to reduce their cost. So, will you, residents get upset about that? Some will. Some absolutely will. Most people will understand, hey, we gotta pay for this. You want your trash picked up, we gotta pay for it. You know, and it can come from a fee, it can come from reduced services, it can come from a whole host of things. But I think building capacity in future years to mirror, and to call out what the trash costs, is going to be an advantage of having a fee. I don't think people realize how much it costs. That is our largest contract that we have here. And those that have moved from other parts of the country, a couple commissioners here, you know, moving from other parts of the country, it's a known thing. You just pay for your trash. You don't, it's not in your taxes. So that's another thing. Also, if we ever do decide to, whether it be in 2024 or future years, it doesn't necessarily have to be 2024. Obviously, it's our biggest one to think about because it's next year's budget. But if we do, it is worth an exercise to go down the fee path. Because if you ever want to control that in the future, it's good to have a habit of that billing. Right, so if we tried to implement fee billing and you could control, let's say, how big your can was, we go automated, right? Or how big your can, or types of things you can do, or credits and all those things. Well, if you don't have that billing mechanism already in place. I was on a phone call today and it was, somebody was just like, it was a madhouse trying to do this, you know, trying to do everything at once. So it would be a good idea at some point. Yes, staff is recommending 2024 being that time. But if not, I still think it's a budget discussion for 25 to 28 for sure. So
Okay.
pros and cons to both.
If we ever were in a fee-based model, the residents would be able to opt out on trash collection.
That's a question for the manager and the solicitor, not for finance guy.
I mean, probably not, because our bid is based on a certain number of, right, certain number of households or a
Yeah.
certain,
Well,
for a certain period of time.
That probably would have to be before the contract was bid. But I also think the policy, as evidenced by, going through my Sunset Hills neighborhood and seeing people that are getting things picked up that shouldn't be getting picked up.
Yeah.
That I don't think that's an easily manageable thing from a contractor municipal relationship. If we collected it in-house, and that's something that we've talked about investigating in the future, I'm not saying that's where we want to go. But that may be a little bit more manageable. But I think the opt-out would be very difficult if you had 730 picked it up, 732 didn't, and 734 did.
Yeah.
You know, and so on and so forth. Maybe if you had specialized cans, so on and so colorful cans, sure. But I think there's a lot more infrastructure with equipment and those types of things that would need to happen for that to be done.
That was the other, oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I don't think people can opt out of trash pickup, right? Because we'd have to look at the health department.
Well,
There's
they'd
a
be,
variety of
they
other
have their own place.
factors.
they can get, you know,
Well,
they have
in
to
some
decide.
places, right, in some communities, it is the private
Yeah.
property owners, but the municipalities still approve the haulers, you know, who are, you know, in.
Well, and there's other municipalities around us that used to have 2 or 3 contractors throughout the neighborhood at all times and different trash days, pickups and all those different things. So I don't think we're ever wanting to go down that path, but you know, I did want to point out some of the cons too. It's not the pros,
Right.
none of this is rosy. Let's just, you know, yeah, it is cost increases,
I mean,
but
I have lived in a state where you just pay separately and it's just part of what you do, and it's not considered one of the things you look to your municipality for, right? But right now, we are one of those places, so if we go down that route for all of the reasons you mentioned just 2 minutes ago, make a lot of sense. We know that structure with stormwater worked very well for us when that decision was made 11 years ago. So, or 12 years ago, how many years is it? 11? Yeah, so those reasons make a lot of sense, but I think they will bring questions because that is something that's expected. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind now. So I think we have to address that with a little more nuance than maybe we would have if people were just expecting it, or the few people coming from those places who expect it to be separate. So we have to have that conversation. I think it comes down to, if we decide to have the conversation of, do we include it in something where we increase taxes, right? Because when we do piecemeal tax increases just for garbage, because that's the big fee increase this year, 30% or 40%. And then what is it the next time? You know, is it some other contract? Is it the next bond we're doing? Is it the next uptown project, right? All feasible things that you could potentially raise taxes for. But when you separate out and go to a fee, then you know, hey, your fee is going up $2 because the garbage contract went up $2. It's a little bit easier to swallow, I think, or at least to understand in the future. But still, we have to have that conversation. And then if we do have the conversation of moving to something where it's direct or even just a pass through, then we get into conversations of, well, what do we expect the municipality to cover from a service standpoint? Or what do residents reasonably expect the municipality to provide, and what do taxes cover? And I think that's a whole separate thing.
The one I said, the one other thing I'll mention, because the commission did discuss this before, when we talked about automated collection, so you'll notice there is nothing under the one-time costs here because we set up this spreadsheet for any option that the commission chose. But if the commission wanted to pursue automated collection in a future contract, through a fee, we would have an ability to, as Andrew had mentioned in a previous discussion session, maybe we charge $1 extra on the fee. And then we build up a small reserve fund to then have money in the bank to purchase the automated cans next time around. So we're not looking at the 2029 contract, however that comes out, being like, oh, we have to spend, $1.5 million to buy automated cans right off the bat on top of whatever the increase is. So that is another potential advantage of the fee. Yeah, right.
And con, I think with the fee is that, I'm not leaning one way or the other, I'm just, con is that anytime you're paying for something, you have a specific expectation on that service level. So I think that when we don't meet that, which is beyond our control, because it's a vendor, residents are gonna be extra mad, especially when they're paying, in 2028, $400 a year for their trash and recycling.
There's an optional item here for us to think about. Go ahead.
Well, so when are we scheduled to talk about this again? Because I would recommend that the commissioners go back and look at, the conversations that happened in 2011 related to the ERUs and how that evolved, because we'd be talking about a similar thing, because no matter how we shake it, someone's gonna be upset. If we do per household, then we're charging more for people who have smaller households. Meaning I only have one person at my house, I'm paying just as much as someone who has 10 people that live there. It's the same conversation of, I have a bigger house, therefore I pay more in taxes, so really I get the brunt of that, so. All of those things came up in those conversations from 2011. I recommend looking at that.
Yeah, and I think there's gonna be conversations tying in a budget time,
Right.
because we're just gonna have those tough choices going. Okay, here's what it costs, are we unassigned funds, or whatever avenue we choose to go down. So that's what I think.
It's possible to do this without the other information, in my mind.
Exactly.
Yeah, I just wanted to be a little proactive because I hate surprises. I know this group doesn't appreciate them either. Right? As we get further into the budget, there are some other significant considerations here. There's the fire training facility that we have a grant for. There are the new revised sidewalk policy, if you want to put some funding available for that.
Right.
The whole River Street discussion and the overall street maintenance
Right.
discussion. We've talked about a number of plans, an active transportation plan, a plan for the South Garage. I have no idea yet whether we're gonna see an increase in our workers' comp rates. I have no
Sure.
idea what our health insurance rates are gonna look like. We'll start to get those numbers in. We wanna do a salary study update. And to Craig's point, if we look at staffing and personnel, what are the impacts of that? Either from a cost standpoint of adding additional personnel, or if it's a reduction in staffing somewhere, what are the impacts to services?
Services.
So there's a whole lot to consider here, and I just,
Sure.
as we get further in, I don't want anybody to be caught off guard that,
Yeah. We're all kind of
Budget
sitting here
times to
thinking,
be-
"Ooh, what's it gonna be?"
Budget time will be extra fun this year as we go through all these scenarios, so. All right, but yes, we come back in November and we'll be looking, as you mentioned, all these things will be factoring into our decision making at that time. I was gonna move on to the next topic unless someone had a question.
I just have one more question. Would you ultimately set this up as like an enterprise?
It would be a special revenue fund, yes. Dedicated fund. Yeah, it'd be a dedicated fund. Just a question to the auditors for accounting geek speak, but. Yes, but eventually, yes, it would be all its own. Under its own umbrella.
When we do get the additional information, if that's the route we're going here, it would be helpful to, and again, I know this came up in 2011, but since we're talking about the potential of it for garbage, we would need to spell out pretty clearly what happens if people don't pay. And I know you said we have a 98%, but that means we have a 2% non-payment. So what does that mean for people? Like, do we put a lien on your property if you can't pay a $50 garbage bill? You know, things like that. So
I'll defer to Andrew, but I would imagine would have use the same philosophy or same threshold that Jordan uses now for any other type of lien.
Right.
You need to reach a certain threshold before it actually makes sense for us.
Yeah.
but we should, you know, we should have that in front of us for when we do this next conversation.
Yeah, so that's fine. And we can, if that's sounding like we want to take it to the next level of preparing, mirroring, game planning, what that would look like. We can have that ready for you whenever you decide to call that tonight meeting.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for
Thank you.
doing this and we'll be continued. Next on the agenda, bid process. Oh, you got a short straw.
Well, Dan's gonna be jumping on the Zoom meeting, but I'm here for that. So, see everybody.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay. I'm trying to share my screen. There we go. Okay. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you for indulging me to be away from the meeting tonight and do this via Zoom. Josh is here also. He helps a lot on the bidding process in Mount Lebanon, but Keith just asked us to give an overview of the bidding process that we follow and some of the recent trends we've been seeing due to some of the bids that we have received. So that's the purpose tonight. So just the things that we'd like to cover, the process, the conditions we saw pre-COVID, current trends. We looked at some recent bids that we've received and sort of go over what we call our best bidding practices that we follow when doing projects. And the street reconstruction change order, that's already been addressed. I forgot to take that off the last, that was from the previous time we were going to do this. So just on the bidding process, the first thing we do when we decide on bidding something, we actually prepare a notice of bids. There's basic information that you can see on your screen that's included in that. What we do with that notice of bids is we send it to Post-Gazette Special Edition, which runs every Thursday. We also send it directly to contractors that we are aware of that can perform the work and that have previously bid on similar projects. So that's part of the extra thing that we do to get notices out there. And then as soon as we put those notices in the paper, there are third-party bid exchange services the contractors actually they subscribe to. They get notifications from those third parties about the bids and so forth, and they become active, or they take a look at what we're proposing to do through the bid advertisement and determine whether they want to look further at the information. So we also do some things like sending the advertisement directly to the contractors that we know. We follow up with those contractors to ask them if there will be bidding projects. And in terms of what our opinion of cost is related to it, we do have a full-time construction estimator on job with a lot of experience. He follows and tracks project costs, because really our opinions of costs are really only as good as the previous bid that we've received, that sort of adjusts for the marketplace as what it costs to do projects. So again, that's why we call them opinions of cost, because they may not necessarily reflect the current market condition if we haven't received those types of bids in a while. We do get sidetracked sometimes by projects that are sort of out of the ordinary. Projects at the tennis center sometimes become more complicated because there are not a lot of people out there that do Hartrue sports courts. Fencing projects, sometimes you have to break those out because fencing guys don't like to go along with other people. So there's a lot of nuances as to how you want to do this. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, but again, when we price the things, we're only as good as the last project we looked at. So some of the trends that we've seen, pre-COVID, there were a lot of contractors available for the same disciplines. The workforce was, I'll say, more plentiful. Materials were readily available, and contractors pretty aggressively bid projects. And they would take a project later in the season sometimes just to fill some time slots if something else fell through. But really, these types of things were important to the bidding trends that we saw. Post-COVID, reduced number of contractors for the same disciplines, lack of workforce available. I think the commission's well aware of this on some of the projects that we have ongoing right now. Material costs have increased. There's long wait times to get material. And then there's a backlog of projects to be completed, especially with infrastructure money out there and some of the other things that are going to happen. So contractors are more able to pick and choose what they submit to bid. They do have some full schedules. We also know, and we've seen this in Mount Lebanon, that the major utility companies, including the water company and the gas companies, continue to replace their line. They occupy contractors who might bid municipal work with pipeline work and restoration work on their own. So those people are taken away from the marketplace. There's also ample private work out there with not some of the same rigors that you find for municipal contracts, which include prevailing wage rates, all the bonding requirements, and the trends that people don't necessarily want to bid if they don't have to. So overall, we've seen costs have gone up and we have less contractors bidding projects. So some of the recent projects we took bids upon, the Arden Road project was one of them where we saw the cost be pretty high. We had 6 contractors that picked up the bids for the bid documents. 3 contractors attended a pre-bid meeting and only 1 contractor bid the project. So again, this is just one snippet, but the difference in the Arden Road project, I would say it involved multiple disciplines. You had to do concrete, you had to do paving, some things that it was later in the season, things that sort of made it unattractive, and the only one bidder that bid it high because of those reasons. Bradfordton Park, again, this was a multidisciplinary type of a project. We had actually 11 contractors pick up bid documents and no contractors bid the project. It wasn't that complicated, so we didn't do a pre-bid meeting on this one. The public safety building roof, we had 12 contractors pick up the documents, 8 contractors at pre-bid meeting, and only 1 bid. The word that we got on this one was that when one of the contractors saw, when the other contractors saw the person who was there to bid the work, they felt they wouldn't be able to compete with their numbers. So they backed off. Sometimes you see that happen, like certain contractors go after work very aggressively in certain communities, and sometimes they can scare away the other contractors. So you can begin to see this is all, it kind of doesn't make sense at all, and that's kind of what it is. It's kind of when you put it out there, there's all these factors that play into your bidding process. The golf course cart paths, we did have 4 contractors picked up the bids and 3 bid it. We actually got some decent bids on that project and were able to award it and do all of the work that we planned to do, given the way that Matt broke the project out into different components. So that one worked out well. So I just kind of bring this all to fruition. What do we do? What do we think are best practices for successful bidding? We definitely try to bid projects earlier in the season. It's most advantageous. I think we're on a great schedule related to all of our contracts that we bid sort of yearly. We get those out. We know what's coming. We get them out early. For instance, any of the repeat contracts we have for sewer work, we go after those right out of the gate. They're ready. As soon as the commission has selected the streets, we're out on the streets for the big contract, which is our street reconstruction project, and also for our paving maintenance project. So again, getting those out early is most important. We have to consider longer durations related to project completion. Again, giving contractors enough time to do the work. If you force them into a corner to try to do it too quickly, sometimes they'll back away from that. So I say if we bid later in the season, we kind of want to leave that open for the opportunity for the contractor to complete the work in the following year, as long as they reach certain milestones. Usually it's the restoration that it has to be completed in the second year. Allowing for multiple bid options in the bidding process, having base bids with the bare minimum, and then having adds and or deducts to stay within budget. I think we try to do that a lot now too. Most of the times it's very successful, as Matt did recently with his project. And then bid projects with a base bid and add alternates to allow all or some of the parts of the bid. And that's another way to go. And then finally, there are other bidding options such as co-stars that you can have projects that are bid by the state on a state level that we can piggyback on as a municipality to use their options. We're considering that right now for some of the work at the tennis center because it is such a specialized type of a bidding. So these are kind of the nuances that we go into. I will say that we try to look at things and work within Mount Lebanon's structure in terms of sometimes we can break a project apart and sort of make ourselves almost like a GC, that being the municipality as a general contractor. So for instance, we had higher bids on the project that we bid for Brafferton. So Josh broke that down into components. We were able to seek quotes on those components within the bid limits. And we are successful now, I think, in bringing that back in and under budget. So sometimes you have to put something out there, you see what you get, and then you have to react. And I think we are very nimble on that. It's tough to determine that up front until you get the bids in that you go out under the normal process. So I like to be as flexible as possible. I think we are, as much as the solicitor will let us be. we push it to the limit and be within the law, of course, but try to use all of our options in terms of going forward. So that's the presentation. I'm glad to answer any questions and go from there.
I just have two questions there. A request for two different lists. The first is on page 4 of the presentation, there's a comment about third parties that Gateway might have a relationship with. So I'd love to see a list of the contractors that Gateway communicated with related to all of the bids that we sent out this year. So that's the first question. And the second question is, I'd love to get a list of all the first-time contractors. So a list of the contractors for anything that we bid publicly who worked with the municipality for the first time. So if we can do that, maybe 23 and 22, that would be good.
Sure. Not a problem. And I mean, there's new contractors that come on all the time, and we're always open to working with anybody. I mean, and again, it's when you get new contractors, you just have to go out and get recommendations. I get other municipalities that call me on contractors all the time that they are seeing for the first time. So there again, is the challenge in taking on a new contractor and making sure that they can do the work.
And the one additional piece that you didn't mention, but just for general information, I know that on some of our, I'll say, multi-year contracts or our maintenance contracts, like backflow preventer, valve maintenance, and CCTV, we bid those as a 3-year contract a base year, then two option years for the municipality, which is really beneficial for the municipality because if those prices increase by market, we typically get a better price because we have the two option years. And if there's a decrease in materials that would cause a decrease, then we have the option to go back out to market. So that's just one additional way that we approach bidding for, again, a lot of our standard maintenance contracts.
No, it just said cool beans. That was.
That's it. Mr. Flynn, any questions? All right, good stuff. Well, thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Josh. Appreciate you coming in and walking through the process.
No problem.
Next on the list, parks and field signage. Bill, there's Bill. Morning.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Kelly. How you going?
I got something kind of fun to talk about tonight, the
Yeah.
signage that we arrived at that took a couple master plans, but we're here. So we went through this in '04. Knocked off a lot of the stuff in that master plan, I think did a pretty good job. One of the things we left and punted to the next one, obviously signage, some bigger projects like that. To no surprise, we went through this master plan, they said, get your signage up. So Mr. McGill gathered a group of staff just to keep this going, keep a push on it. Not that there wasn't work on it, there were some boards and authorities, some sports groups already kind of taking this to the table. So we had public information, public works, planning, and then we kicked it around to other departments as needed. Inspections, Rodney and his staff took a look at mounting methods, construction materials, are we choosing the best materials for a longevity and a good purchase. So we went through multiple design meetings with Colano. Laura and her staff in public PIO jumped in and kind of spearheaded that, and we all came together to grab what you see in your packet, which is our current design that we're all pleased with, I know internally. So has a lot of elements from the bronze signs that you'll see around town. Our goal was not to reinvent the wheel. These things look good that are out there now. We just kind of wanted to piggyback off them. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Looks good.
So for this first round, the goal is really to keep it simple. Let's identify our parks. Yes, there are pavilions, other amenities and stuff to get to. Let's get them identified first in the best way possible. So this message schedule, which is the long sheet that you see, that's what we're going on. Don't be worried if something's kind of missing there, like, as far as like, bigger areas that we all use that you don't see on here, we'll get there. This document's important, but it's not as important as the Colano packet, because we will keep this as a living document. So we will go back to them probably in the future, most likely to say, hey, we're ready for our secondary set of signs. We'd like to identify, some of our smaller things, our pavilions, where restrooms are, that stuff that we know we need to do. This is really just the first step. So not really a ask tonight, but just, wanted to kick it back to everybody to look at it. Our next big steps will be to involve, parks, sports, baseball, softball, those associations. They're gonna aid in locations. There's a lot of talent on those boards.
Okay.
So we will do a lot of site visits. My little impromptu paint pictures here with signs imposed in there. That's just to get us close and get a concept of what we're looking at. So we'll start working with those areas, or with those boards and authorities and sports groups to make sure we get it right before anything goes in the ground. It's my understanding we'll most likely install these in-house through our labor. I think we do a pretty good job at installing signs all the time, so this isn't anything new to us. We'll just continue to install signs. There's different options in there, so this message schedule makes it easy to go back to vendors and say, hey, looks good, we want to see that bird park in the box, expensive style, nice looking sign, that's our premier park, what's that, what does that cost? So this packet from Colano is huge to go out and get really good apples to apples quotes. So they have also offered an additional cost of our design work with them. They're gonna look over what we get together before we go out for quotes. So they're gonna get another look at it, say, hey, you're missing this, make sure you ask for cans of touch-up paint. You're gonna get whacked with weed whackers, that sort of thing. So they're very vetted in this and, they were excited every meeting. Just as we were. So our staff group's gonna keep working at it. Just thought this was the time to loop everyone in, make sure you're aware of, stuff that we're looking to actually get a tangible something out there as a result of the master plan.
Yep.
And it's, any questions or concerns?
Any, like, is these sort of give you like a cost guesstimate? I realize it has to go out
Yeah.
for something to say, we expect the numbers to be in some range or something.
I have all this out to one vendor right now, just as an initial, what do you even think?
Oh,
Where are we at?
nice.
So on top of that, there's also a budget level idling right now for 24. I don't have any funds in there or anything like that, but the workbook's open. Obviously, it says, different levels of park signs, so we'll see what we can do. I don't know if there's any capacity this year to get signs in the ground. If we can, we will, I'm sure, but the next step, obviously, after comment is to get the other groups involved on location. But the process to get quotes can happen as soon as tomorrow. I can start working on that.
Yep.
We had previously received some interest from at least the Baseball Association in potentially funding
Yes.
certain signage, so we'll follow up on that conversation.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, we're also reaching out to the school district
Oh,
to really to provide them with the information.
Sure.
Obviously it's their decision. I will tell you that most of our residents, the majority of our residents, probably can't tell you whether something's a school
Right.
district field or a municipal field. So if we can have at least some type of consistency from a signage standpoint, and there can be something that says or makes a differentiation that says this is a school district facility, that's fine as well, because that'll help us in terms of where those calls go if there's an issue. But at least to make sure that we're communicating with the school district to give them that opportunity and offer any assistance that we can offer there.
so, we might not know the answer to this question, but I'll just ask it anyway, and it's something to think about. If an organization, like a sports organization, wants to fund a sign and they want credit for that, like their logo in the corner, would we allow that?
I don't know the answer to
Yeah,
that
that's just
question.
a-
That's.
We're gonna get that question, so I'll just put it out now and we can think
That's
about
a
it.
design question and this person would say,
We
no.
run into some issues because
Yeah, I would
Put
lean
it
towards
on the
no.
website.
We're not
no.
for sale, I know we sell ads on our baseball fields and in our hockey, and our ice rink, and that's a specific site, but generally.
The
we're not for
reality
sale.
is, the way you look at these signs and what you can see, you would have to have it big enough so people could see it, which takes away from the
Of the
message of what
message,
it
good
is.
point.
I mean, it's not an efficient way to advertise who has paid for the sign.
So we'll accept, maybe what the thought is, we'll accept donations, it'll help signs get up faster, but.
Put it on
won't
the
get
website, credit
your
them
logo
there.
Another question, if the sponsored by is on the back,
Well,
that way, at least, to your point, driving down the street, you can see it's whatever park it is. But if they really want to say, well, we want our name on it somewhere, well, if it's on the back and then whatever print back there.
Some of these are double sided.
I was gonna say some of them are double sided.
Some of them are double sided signs, yeah.
Some with the property available to the approach would be best suited double sided.
Well, what happens if they refuse to pay the second year? How do you take it off?
Good point. Good point.
Refer to the design.
It brainstorm that sorts of things.
That's right.
Well, awesome, are you available to come to the sports board meeting, or is someone available to come to the?
I'm sure we can figure that out.
I'll ask. Yeah, I'll
This will go to
stop by.
parks next.
Okay, that sounds great.
Nice job. It looks very good.
So I do want to give credit to both to Laura and Phil.
Yes.
I did pull the group together, but the bulk of the work was done by,
Yep.
those two individuals, so.
Looks great.
credit's due.
I'm really delighted you used Colano. Very good designers.
Yeah, this is a huge celebration. I mean, it's been years people have been screaming, we need signs, so you finally pulled it off. Thank you, Laura.
Yeah.
Thank you, Phil.
Any other questions,
You
comments?
did it.
All right, thank you, Bill, appreciate it.
Great work.
All right, next on the list, Brick Street policy, UPPs. I'm back down.
Yeah.
just while we're getting situated, because I had it open on my screen for the large home viewing audience. Here's the kind of proposed sign design, so we recorded in perpetuity
Yeah.
the Zoom show.
Oh, good. Is it me or is the top wider than the bottom?
It is,
Okay.
and it,
It looked like, I just.
when we were
wanted to be sure.
reviewing designs, we looked at everything from the edges of sign, right? Because if you got a sharp edge, there's the potential for somebody climbing on a sign to, so
right.
we were very intentional in terms of the designs that we chose.
No, good, looks good.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, commissioners. We are back once again to talk about brick streets. We've had several discussions on this over the last few years. And the last time we talked, the commission had some feedback on staff's proposed draft policy. So you have received a track changes edited version of that, which incorporates, I think, some of the gist of what the commission was going for. So kind of like we did with the sidewalk policy, we're here to just kind of talk through what's in the draft, if there's any additional changes before the commission wants to see it on a public agenda to vote on it. We also received a copy of the street listing, which is the addendum to the policy. And then I also made a flow chart, because I know everybody loves flow charts, just to try and help visualize kind of the process, because last time I think there were some process questions about how do we make decisions at certain points, and then what happens. So I kind of put together this little flow chart to help kind of show where things go at certain steps. So I'm happy to answer any questions the commission might have. If you want to talk about process, the policy, wherever we want to go with it. I will say that since we've talked about it a few times tonight, we are in late August, approaching budget season. It probably would be good to have a policy finalized, voted upon, and approved before we get into budget season, so that we have some framework to consider those, budgetary conversations as far as expenditures and things like that go.
I would say, could you walk us through the flow chart, the process?
Sure,
Thanks.
I can do that.
The audience might appreciate it.
Yes, so the very first point is the brick street in need of repair? And if it's not, then we're just gonna monitor the existing conditions of it and not do anything to it. And following that, if the repair is a patch and not the entire street segment, then we have the existing brick street maintenance program, which the commission annually has allocated somewhere usually between $65,000 and $130,000 on a given budget year towards that program. So we have money, that's an existing program, and we do that for patchwork. If it is the entire street segment, that usually occurs when the base of the street is corrupted, and we have an engineer here who can talk much more about that than I can, but I'll leave it at that. Then we have to consider, is the street at the end of its useful life, can it be fixed with a patchwork of the maintenance program, or do we need to go in and do the full depth replacement of it? And if we do that analysis and determine that it's, work can be done with the maintenance program, then we can do work with the maintenance program. If we determine that it's the end of its useful life, then we continue down the center column and say, okay, then how is the brick street categorized within the policy, which is the very colorful attachment A that you have to the policy. So if it's in the keep section, then, or preserve as brick, however we want to call it, then we bid it for full depth reconstruction with brick surfacing in conjunction with the street reconstruction bid. That said, as we found through some previous bids, and Dan kind of touched on it a little bit with his presentation as well, that there are certain contractors that do certain types of work. So a contractor that does asphalt street reconstruction may be able to do brick, but there may also be contractors that specialize in brick reconstruction. So that's why I have this addendum here of a lengthy paragraph. We could consider either including the brick street segment with the same bid as all the other streets, or we could, to be done as brick, or we could consider it as a separate bid, but bid it just at the same time. So then when the commission's awarding the street reconstruction program, you can award the whole program. You just have two different bids you're kind of considering at the same time, one that's brick, one that's asphalt. So then the commission would award the contract, the street would get reconstructed with brick. So to go back up to the middle point here of, how is the street categorized? If it's categorized then to be replaced with other materials, then the street would go on the list for the next street reconstruction bid, under the asphalt streets, or however the engineers would recommend replacing it, because there are other street typologies that exist out there. I know we had a presentation, was it a couple meetings ago on the new type of asphalt that incorporates the glass and all that, the recycled materials. So that's why we didn't specifically call it replace with asphalt. We said replace with other materials because in future years, we tried to write this policy to exist in perpetuity, that if other materials come up that the engineer recommends, we would consider those other materials. So then we would include it with the street reconstruction bid, the commission would award the contract, and the street would be reconstructed with whatever material was recommended. So that's kind of the flow chart of the process. I think the most important to Commissioner Swagger Wilson's point at the last meeting was that the very first one, that if the brick street is not in need of repair, nothing's gonna happen to it. The only thing that triggers something happening is if the street is in need of repair, and then how much repair is needed kind of dictates where it goes in the process.
Okay, here's my biggest point about the whole thing, whole darn thing.
Yes.
Since these are historic assets, before we blow one away, it needs an incredibly rigorous public process around it. It really does. I understand how much more expensive than they are. They're also historic assets. Once you blow them up, they're gone. And so the people that are on the street and in the surrounding area should very much be included in a rigorous, open, public process to discuss it. That's my big down.
Add a step on the flow chart or something or
Yeah,
other like that.
really, I mean, not a letter sent out 30 days ahead, we're doing this. Sorry, that's not enough. We are considering doing this. We need to talk about it. Here's what it would cost. Here's why, la, la, la.
So what about using our existing process as much as possible, so we don't have to recreate the
Sure,
wheel?
that's
What
fine.
about there's a whole year, so what about commission sees it's recommended during street reconstruction streets, and then it's not on that list that year, there's a whole year, it can go to whatever advisory board wants to manage public input phase, and then it's that following year that will be sending out to bid, assuming it makes it through that. Commission's will, the commission still has the will to do it.
Not the only hysteric preservation.
Historic.
Right?
Oh, so yeah, so what you're saying is just where it moves to that other column, it would say
It
instead
really
of
has to
included in the
Yeah.
next reconstruction bid, it would be in the following
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, and
So
make
that's-
sure there's a public process around it, so.
I'm sure there's a 5-year debate.
Right, you're-
Over.
But doesn't have to be
1 year
five
debate.
years.
There's some square in
Yeah.
there to say, okay, it made the list, we're gonna have a thorough communication, I mean,
If
you
you
know,
have
you
this-
have these quote, maybe
Yeah.
streets if you will. Just say yes, no, whatever, maybe there's some number missing, I mean, you know. I'll pick Nakoma for an example, because it's in my ward. The residents may say, please blow the darn thing up, we don't want it anymore, we go, oh, we didn't realize that, or
Well,
Or
but
they might
it's
be
in an
mixed.
area which is all
Yeah.
historic, so I don't know, but anyway, yes, I mean, let's put public process around it because these are assets that belong to the community. And I think it's worthy of a strong community discussion around it, to see what we want to do. We may have the ultimate decision, but it should be based in, the reality of what people want.
I'll go back to, and it never made it into this version of the brick street policy. I think that we need to pick a number of miles of brick. Because this is a financial issue. That's my biggest concern, is that we are kicking this can down the road because we don't want to just accept that we gotta pick something and say, we're gonna figure out how to fund this, and knowing that when Keith goes to put the budget together, a $500,000 or $600,000 hole is gonna all of a sudden appear every year because of this policy. And it's not gonna work. It's not. We're not gonna have enough money just to do, half of these streets on an annualized basis. So then the question becomes, okay, the commission has to give staff guidance at some level to say, you've got to budget at least this much every year. which is gonna be hard no matter what. Beyond that, if a resident says, if a group of residents say, we're willing to put in more, okay. But there's got to be some level of determination that says the municipality is committed to this. And that's it, right? We can't. I don't know how we keep saying, oh, well, okay, I mean, if we're gonna commit to 10 miles, right, that's 600,000 a year, right, that we've got to come up with. That's, you know, what, however many mills that is. 0.22, is that right? Is that, am I reading the memo right, Ian? Every year, right, that's gonna grow, right, over time. And I don't think that that's fair to the rest of the taxpayers who are on other streets who don't have brick. So how do we balance these factors and recognize that this is a very expensive, very valuable, but very expensive asset that we need to be very thoughtful about what we keep rather than what we get rid of?
And I agree with you, and I just think we should give the residents some time, because 1, 2, 3 months isn't enough time to dramatically change their streetscape, right? Let's give them a year, and they're gonna fight about it, they're gonna be upset, we'll have the political will, but this is what we funded, that's what we funded.
It's also,
Can I ask a clarification question, just going back to the beginning? So I understand part of the public process. So in the chart, obviously, there's some streets that are in the historic district, some that are not.
yeah,
There's also some streets that are alleys.
yeah.
Would we need to do a public process on, I guess, non-historic district? Do we need to do a public process on alleys? Like if we're replacing Shopway or Rossway or something like that, would we need to do a public process on that? Or, I mean, if we say everything, then it becomes everything. So that's why I'm just trying to get some clarification there. On that point, and it's okay if you don't have an answer right now, you can, you know, we can circle back later.
I would lean towards everything, but then I would also say you can be a little bit more generous in the streets you show us, like these are the ones we're considering, there's 4, you know, and give us maybe we don't even have the funds to reconstruct them all as asphalt in the next year, but here's the 4 that we would like to get done.
I'm
You know,
seeing-
you already have that list already in your head, I'm sure, like here's some ones that are like low hanging fruit that we would really think don't make sense as brick. Let's just start to see them sooner.
I was very Commissioner Smart, what's the faces you were talking and you're, what was
She
she was thinking?
hides her emotions so well.
Yeah.
Poker is really my Olympic sport. Yeah, it really is. I'm leaning towards historic district, that those are the ones that really need the most rigorous process around them. I mean, I agree with you. I don't see any sense in making an alley that is already brick, saving it as brick. I think that's just nonsense. I mean, it's too expensive and they're alleys. That doesn't make sense. You know, it's not countering you, Andrew, because I do believe in what you're saying. I think there's also one other factor in this, and that's that brick streets are by their very nature traffic calming. So there's some weighing of, for example, Lebanon Hills, which you used to live on. Boy, in the morning, people used to race down that street to avoid the traffic on Washington Road to get their kids to school faster. Okay, leave 5 minutes earlier, please.
I
And
certainly knew
now,
what time it was.
I know, you can put it out of traffic, but now, you know, there are enough lumps and bumps in it. You can't race down that street unless you'd like to lose the undercarriage of your car. So, I think that ought to be factored in as well.
Well, no, and I do think that is important. One point on the historic district, not to belabor this, but if I recall correctly, the reason we have the boundaries of the historic district that we do is because they ran out of money
Yes.
on the project. So that's an arbitrary.
Right, it is arbitrary. Yes, it is. You're
The historic
absolutely right.
district is historic, but there's more that should be included.
Yeah.
But again, the reason for, maybe punctuating that is because the historic district to a great extent was awarded because of the fact that we were, driving and, we were designed to be a suburb that used cars. And so it gives more credence to me to make sure that anything that's historic district gets put in. But you're right, it is totally arbitrary.
Well,
If we only had extra money, we could do, so much.
Right. Well, so and this topic of
Yeah.
the longer public notification process kind of goes back to a broader discussion around, yeah, reconstruction in general, I think,
Yeah.
in my opinion, right? One of the things that I've brought up is that as we move to the mobility board, I really truly would believe that it would be great for us to look farther out down the reconstruction path.
Right.
And notify the mobility board and frankly have mini charrettes
Yes.
on streets. On obviously not on alleys, but
on
we have to
streets.
figure out what that balance is.
Right.
But give public process, public
due
input in a formalized structure
Absolutely.
much earlier in the process, knowing that that reconstruction might not happen for 3 or 4 years.
Right.
But that way, there is time for people to dialogue about what they want the public space in front of their homes to be.
Yeah.
And that could be a brick discussion, that could be, you have sidewalks, that could be just repave the street, it could be speed bumps, it could be, right, Vonerf. Right, there's lots of different discussions that people can have around what they want that street to be. So I don't think this just has to be a brick discussion. Frankly, I think it would be worse off if it were just a brick discussion. I think it's
I
more
agree.
about the broader, creating that structure to have the dialogue about the right of way in front of properties. But that's a lot of work. I know it is. So I think there's a lot of questions as to how do we do that? And how do we create capacity around that? But I think if we're going to be asking, right, the municipality to give notification, we need to have a more standardized framework that's going to be easier once we transition
Yeah.
to do that.
Absolutely.
It seems like, you know, your idea about the mobility board being kind of the avenue of how this is
Yeah.
a public discussion. You know, we're saying for bricks, there's that 1 year mobility period, then it sort of fits, okay, that gives the mobility board time to be the arrangement of how to talk to people and so forth. If we try and do that for every street, then it means whatever list gateway comes, it means what, a year delay is everybody is giving their opinion on every one of those streets. I'm not sure if that's the direction we want to go.
Well, that's where I say it might not be a year, right?
Right.
Again, we can take Street Saver and run it out 20 years, right? It's not like, yeah, you have to just do a 1 year window. I could say, give me the roads over the next 5 years. And let's just look at year 5, right? And start there. Right? Because yeah, we might not get it to them in year 5. It might be year 7, it might be year 3, but at least you have a process where people can engage in dialogue. And I think would need to be very thoughtful about which streets actually go through that process, right?
Exactly.
But I think, and it's not, again, it's not just brick. I think we all see this dialogue around, people are frustrated as to that, how do I contribute to this dialogue? Before I get the notice 30 days in advance, even though we have communicated more frequently than that. And we do try, and staff does, yeoman's work to get that information out. But how do we have a richer dialogue earlier before it actually does go to bid? And to facilitate that dialogue. Because to a certain extent, I think, yeah, I mean, if traffic calming becomes the issue, right, that should be a factor in this discussion. But if the brick is going away, right, what do residents want it to look like?
Right.
That's an important conversation. If we just asphalt it, we might be missing opportunities.
I'm not married to a year, but I think you need a rigorous process, and I think that's a great assignment for the mobility board. What does a rigorous process look like? What do we do? How do we do it? Doesn't have to be a year. I mean, I've never been in a year-long process to design something.
Well, I think this is gonna be multiple steps, we're saying.
Yeah.
First out, it's gonna be a year maybe, because bricks, if we're saying, okay, take that time, cooling off, look at bricks kind of thing. Down the road, as we kind of build a rhythm or whatever to say, okay, we kind of know what we're doing and say, in addition to that, let's say 1 brick street, do these other 5 streets that aren't brick that are, we think are gonna be the next ones up to be in the following year. And that's gonna take some time to figure out how to set things up, how to execute it, that kind of thing. Someone had said earlier, I didn't remember who said it about streets and to say, well, what if? And we've got these kind of, to keep streets, to replace streets, and the divided is the thought to say, the sense of the group to say, just do the keep as brick, to do the keep as brick plus the divided. What in the end, did we get the 3 votes to say of these, I'll say 3 blocks here, agreement on what the goal, the target,
Yeah,
whatever
we
it
need to make a
is.
decision. we all agree that we're keep, we're all agreed, I think that the not keep,
Replacing,
the replace is replace. But then where does the group feel on the divided section?
That's just the question.
Right.
And to go
Good
back to
question.
the previous discussion that we had, some of the divided streets are kind of linked together. And that was where we kind of weren't sure on how to do some decision making. So, for example, I'll take,
No,
yes, exactly, Birch and Hill,
I've driven them all.
yes.
Mhm.
So Adeline at the top is a very flat street. It's on the keep list. It's at the top of the keep list because
Right,
it's alphabetically first.
Mhm.
Hill, we had the bottom of it wash out a few years ago, back in 2018, I believe it was replaced.
There's a water main break.
That was the
That
summer
was
storm.
the summer storm.
Yeah.
Main and
Storm.
Hill for the
Right.
David.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep, right.
So Birch also, this section of Birch, very flat, keeping that one. So the real question is, in the sort of divided part, is the rest of Hilf extending up to Adeline, and then this little dead end section of Birch is the ones that were on the divided list. And that's those two, whatever decisions made for one should be made for the other.
Well, just like you had the arrow on there a second ago, that cul-de-sac on Birch is one of the maybes,
Yeah, exactly.
This dead, end, yep.
you know.
And this section of Hilf is the other, is also a main. So
And then
that's
just to throw another wrinkle in all of it, I'll bet that neighborhood could qualify as a historic district if we'd had the money to do it. So if we start blowing away, right, hurt it. The fun of it.
So trying to get back to a decision.
So it sounds like we're taking it
Just wanna
street
throw
by
my
street.
grenade in.
Well, from a budget, from staff's budget perspective, right, they're gonna have to put a number in the budget, right? And so to some degree, right, and this can change frankly every year, but the reality is that we need to pick a line for staff to say, okay, this is what the number we're gonna try to solve for. This year, next year, and the next 20 years.
I agree with what you were saying before. I think the policy does give us the ability or even engenders us kicking the can on this, although we would do that anyway, right? Because we're gonna have to vote every year. We've talked about this every time we've talked about the brick conversation. Would there be any downside to just, so the process chart that Ian laid out makes sense to me as to how we would look at whether a road needs to be reconstructed or just patched if that's how it's done, and then that analysis comes to us in conjunction with all the roads. And we look at that together. What's the downside of doing that?
Well, I would argue that the downside is we're not reserving the capital necessary.
And I would agree with you that that would be the best option. But it's the one thing that this group of 5 people seems either one, not to understand the concept of, or not be willing to actually put money toward it. Because we've had this conversation 15 times. So like, do we actually just put a vote forward that says, I make a motion that we put
This one's every year.
$300,000 every
Yeah.
year to brick, however much that gets us, 8 miles or 3 miles.
Right.
Until that number changes 5 years down the road or becomes 0 or doubles? Or do we come up with a number between all of us and say, this is what we are willing to do? Because at the end of the day, saving it to budget time puts it in the scope of everything else that we spend money on, which to me makes a lot of sense. We're looking at everything and saying, this is what residents have told us is important to them. And this is what we believe is important, and this is what we're prioritizing, and bricks would fall into that, just like any other thing.
And in budget time, when is at the end, the last session is we're trying to say, okay, how do we allocate the last whatever? And one of those line items was $600,000 for brick. And the group said, I'll spend it on something.
And that's likely
No,
always going to happen, because what's our surplus been the last couple
Okay,
of
but
years?
here's what I'm proposing, and I think this is what we're finally doing. Instead of looking at 600,000 of brick reconstruction and 2.2 asphalt reconstruction, let's look at 2.8 reconstruction of streets. And it's 1 million this year to brick and, 1.8 or whatever it is for asphalt. Or maybe we do 2 million to brick one year because that's the highest needs, because that's the lowest OCI.
Right.
And that is going to degrade our overall OCI number. I know that, but right now our number's at 79 or 80. It's really high. I think we can afford a little bit of that.
One of the things that the Carnegie Mellon study said was that we don't need to do full
Whole
depth
street.
reconstruction. Maybe we just do a patch
Do
here,
more,
a patch
yeah,
there.
patch.
The process that was laid out, or really any process that analyzes street by street, almost like the way we do our normal streets, is going to identify those. And then there would be a cost associated with that. So if we determine that we only need 30 feet of patching, which has been done in several areas in the fourth ward over the last year. If we only need 30 feet, what's the cost associated with that? And then we wrap that into an overall street reconstruction or just an overall street program. And we say, look, we don't have to increase it by 600,000. Like you said, maybe it's 3 million total instead of 2.9. And then we lose a point or two in OCI for a couple of years, and maybe we don't.
I guess my argument is that by picking a line on this spreadsheet, we're enabling that.
Right, I agree.
Yeah,
Okay,
Totally agree.
so it's really a question of pick a line.
let's pick a line. Let's pick a line tonight.
I want just the green. That's where I stand.
You want,
Just the green, just the keep,
You want everything,
yes.
just the keep. Okay,
That's
I
where
will
I'm at.
second Andrew, just keep the keep, that. Got some English teachers yelling at me right now. Keep the keep, yes. Keep the items that are noted as keep. That's 2 votes for saying, just keep the items that were listed as keep and break, 8.15 miles. Obviously, you need 3 to make this thing happen, so that's 2 yays, so I'm looking at 3 commissioners across the other side of the table. And going, anybody? Anybody?
So I vote to keep the yellow and the green, but I'm willing to concede it, whatever it takes to at least keep that green tonight. So my first choice is yellow and green. I don't know if there's 3 that go yellow and green.
green.
Okay, right,
Commissioner
you are.
Fella, you are the deciding vote.
There you go, it's up to you.
I
You want half and half, you could
No,
do split
just
it in the middle.
vote to keep them all and just keep looking at it. I don't agree with either of those options. It just it doesn't make sense.
Well, I think there's alleys in most of the.
I'm willing to
There's
switch
a lot
that.
of these
I want to
rallies.
finish this tonight. I'm willing to switch to green. If we don't.
Well, I
have-
mean, are there really streets on the divided that really truly are?
Yes,
I
I
do
do
think
think
they
they
are.
are.
If
I drove them all.
Andrew,
Go ahead.
Commissioner Rainey has said, keep this keep, that's 3
He's a
votes. for
good
keep this keep.
compromiser.
That means we then can get this draft off and
And
put it on
let's
something. we can
straight,
vote on.
let's pull one more out.
Because we
I'd
couldn't
have to
move
go
forward
look at
because
it again.
appendix A wasn't finalized. We've now
Yeah.
finalized appendix A.
Yeah.
This means we got something that we can then vote on. So,
So in the text of the policy itself, since we have 2 minutes until your discussion on boards and authority, if anybody has any other feedback on the text of the actual policy, let me know before we put it on an actual commission agenda to vote.
I put 2 comments for the text, take them or leave them. I'm gonna vote no on this policy anyway, but the 2 comments that I put were, the first one, you have when a brick street is deemed to have reached the end of its useful life. My comment was it should have come to the commission before it reaches the end of its useful life, so that addition doesn't make sense. It's number 1A for procedures. And then 30 days is ridiculous for notification. We know months and months and months what streets are gonna be done. We should send notification to affected streets the minute we determine they're gonna be affected. And then when construction's being done, we have whatever the legal requirement for notification is. So if we decide that McCully is gonna be a street that is being touched or reconstructed, the day after that decision is made, we should be preparing notification to those people that their street is going to be worked on at some point. We can give them a reasonable timeline. If that moves, it moves. There's no way to change that. But they should understand, as soon as we make that decision, that they're included in it. I'm not talking about, it's in our minutes and go find it on the website. Because we all know the 5 people who are all in this room that are gonna do that. So like, we need to give them real notification that it's gonna happen.
I'll ask the manager,
Good
just to do the
public policy
notification. I mean,
well, okay, so I'm gonna ask you for a little clarification. So are we referring specifically to, going back to what Ann had suggested, brick streets that are going to be replaced in something other than brick. Because if they're gonna be put back in brick, that
Doesn't make
advanced
any difference, yeah.
notification really
Not
isn't necessary, right?
Just
I mean, we
put
still
them
need to notify residents under our normal notification
Right,
process.
But you don't need a public.
But we're not
process.
making it a change to the surface.
Correct.
So is that and I'll ask Commissioner Grella, because it was his point, is that notification, you're looking for that just?
So so section 1, item D, residents on affected streets will be notified by letter or other formal communication as far in advance as possible, but not less than 30 days. My comment is, any affected street, they should be notified when that decision is made. And then as construction is happening, as whatever that normal timeline would be. So if 30 days, if Phil can answer this question, I don't know what the number is. If 30 days is law, we have to give at least 30 days notice. That's fine. I'm saying we should give them notice the minute their street is on some deciding factor. It's not like it's gonna cost us $1 million. Send a letter to them that says your street came up on a list of streets that's going to be constructed in somehow this year. We're gonna be doing curbs, full depth, whatever it is. They should get a note when that decision is made so that they know way in advance.
And I'm gonna get back to the question of saying, are you suggesting that when we say, let's say the 10 streets that are gonna be done in a year, all 10 streets get that letter, even though it's to say, we're saying, you had asphalt before you get asphalt again, you know.
If there's
or
being,
just- or
if
just
there's being work done on the street.
be it
So like if we,
construction or resurfacing.
correct.
So we did change that process a couple of years ago. So that once we have bids back and the commission awards the streets,
Mhm.
there's an initial notification that goes to residents on those streets that say, hey, your street has been identified or approved for either reconstruction or resurfacing. That goes out as soon as that commission decision is made. We then also include in that notification that they should continue to check the website for the schedule,
Sure.
because we don't meet with the contractors until we've actually
Right.
awarded.
Sure.
And then, so there are repeated notifications, and then within a certain time frame, and I'll defer to Rudy, before work is essentially scheduled to commence, they get yet another notification that the contractor,
One from us and one from.
one from us, one from the
Two
contractor.
additional.
So there's 4 different notifications that currently go out, one as far in advance as possible,
Yeah.
because I can't send it before
Yeah,
the
sure.
award.
Right, right.
Yeah.
As long as we're doing that at the time of approval, that's fine. That's my opinion.
All right, so it's your hot button.
As long as it covers like what we're talking about here, if that would be included in that, then yes.
And my question really was more towards the specific issue of brick, if it's being replaced. Commissioner Swager seemed to want to have
Public process.
a further time frame notification. I'll give you an example. Last year, we had Craig Court and Crystal
Right.
that were on the list originally to be awarded. Because we didn't have the Brick Street policy in place yet, we pulled those back
Mhm.
and we replaced those with 2 other
Right.
alternates,
I
right?
remember.
So again, looking forward to this year, I'd have to make the assumption that the condition on either one of those 2 streets has not improved. So they would typically be back on that list. Do we need to now just send a notification to those residents and say, hey, these are being considered for replacement as asphalt, not in brick? Develop whatever that public process is, give them the ability to input. Or is that somewhat disingenuous just because the commission's made a policy?
I think that would, I
I
mean,
think when you hit the replace ones, those, you don't need that kind of public process. You definitely need enough notification. But I think the ones that are divided, disputed, those are
Those are the ones that you're really focused on?
Yeah, those are the ones I'm really focused on. I went and did Craig Court. I'd rip out Craig Court tomorrow. It's blacktop all around it. It's a mess. It has a trench on one side. I don't know who put the trench there, but it's there. It needs to be replaced. I wouldn't put it back in brick. It'd be nonsense.
It has nothing to do with the name of the
It's
person
driving.
sitting next to you either.
No, it doesn't.
I don't think we need to notify people that it's being considered for replacement. I think we just need to notify them as soon as we can when the decision has been
Yeah.
made to replace them. I think it would be incumbent on the commissioner to talk to residents in streets in their ward that are gonna be affected. You know, like looking at the ones that were in yellow, the majority of them are in my ward. I've had conversations with most of the people on those blocks and they want to save their brick and they're obviously not gonna be happy about
Right.
tonight's decision.
I would say, every street should have a public process. Every street, that's my vote. Every street needs a public process. The opportunity, they don't have to show up. Maybe they don't care.
That is gonna put sand in the gears, like, and that goes back to my question, like, Mr. Flynn talked about. At some point, the mobility board
Right.
trying to
Yeah, I
get some
think
input.
For the mobility,
You
board, yeah.
You
for
know,
the
it just,
mobility board.
it's, I think. There are gonna be things that we're just being pressed, as management Bill talks about for time. We've got two streets that we say. Hey, these are on the bubble. We know it's gonna be, maybe we send a notice tonight. So that's hyperbole, but tomorrow, just say, hey. These are ones gonna be evaluating, next February, March. We want to give you as much notice to think about it. We may not get to every street, but I mean, eventually we get into this cycle that we say, yeah, we know, from building boards talking to people. But we have this transition period. And for that transition period, does it make sense for just these two streets to get some notification out there?
Couple things. So there's only 30 streets. I hope we're not doing more than 1 or 2 a year as asphalt, to be constructed as asphalt. So I think that that's not a crazy lift that we would, the mobility board would have 1 or 2 streets a year that they're getting resident feedback on. And second, I'm really hoping that this preservation policy preserves brick as brick. And we're not just initially off the board, and as soon as we pass this policy, replacing brick with asphalt. I want to see next year brick reconstructed as brick, something to vote on. That's the point of the policy, is to preserve brick, and that's the message I want to send to our residents for reviewing.
Right, and it's also 8 o'clock, so the question, what, if anything, did we agree on at this point, or do we like this to?
We agreed on a line on a spreadsheet that allows staff to come up with a
Right.
number for the budget.
That's right. And we said
That,
more
that
public-
honest, and we agree that there's
more public
more public
process.
process. Frankly, because we drew a line on a spreadsheet that has names on it, doesn't mean those streets have to be the final ones.
There's still more time. Yeah.
There is now a budget.
Back
Framework.
to this thing that's still a draft. Do we have enough that
We
staff?
need more
can make
public
this-
process, like Craig said.
So this is not ready to be voted on yet.
Change the number of days from 30 to something else. Right?
Well, the way it's
Well,
written is as far in advance as possible, but not less than 30 days.
But if you're saying that
Not
if
less than
changes are being done.
Yeah.
That they would be included on as soon as the decision is made. I mean, there's no way, if this gets done as part of our normal street process. There's no way that the streets would be done within 90 days of us making that decision, right?
Typically not.
Usually we bid
We bid in
in
March.
March.
We award in April.
Or April, yeah, and then we started in May, but we could. If there was a brick street, we could say that they have to move that later in the schedule.
I don't think we have to make a special, I don't think we have to make a special number just for Brook Street. I'm thinking, my comment is to push out the notification in general. As much as possible.
60?
And we,
We say
and we
60?
Why
usually
don't
do
we
the
just say
presentation.
notifications made as soon as the commission makes a decision to award a contract?
Yeah.
That's all.
We
That's perfect.
following
That's
commission
fine.
award.
All right.
All right. We
The
okay?
most
on
notice
those?
we can give.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll argue about it next.
Shots.
Just kidding.
Shots.
So no boards and authorities updates?
All right, so we'll call that the last word on this for now. Again, you'll get something to us to review, set up what it's gonna be on discussion, et cetera, et cetera. Unless anybody,
No more discussion, we're gonna vote on it, right?
unless there is anything on boards and authorities that anybody absolutely has to update on before we go next door.
No. Historic Preservation is doing lots of, community outreach and educational events. I'll give more info later.
Great.
Anybody else?
Nope.
We adjourn. See you next door.